Good evening, everyone. I'm going to turn things over to John Richardson.
Welcome and thank you everyone for joining us for Newsroom Live. I am coming to you live from the newsroom. My name is John Richardson. I am the Deputy Managing Editor of the Portland Press Herald. We at the Maine Trust for Local News consider election coverage and informing voters to be at the core of our mission. And we're extremely proud of the work done every day here by our journalists, including the two you're going to meet very soon. A special thank you to our subscribers for supporting our work and making it possible. And if you're not yet a subscriber, please consider signing up so you can follow all of our coverage leading up to the election and beyond. I'd also like to thank our sponsor for this series, Murray, Plum and Murray. Michael Traister from Murray, Plum and Murray has a few words to say before we get started.
Good evening. My name is Michael Traister, and I serve as managing partner of Murray, Plum and Murray, a full-service general practice law firm located in Portland. We are proud sponsors of the Newsroom Live series and supporters of local independent news. I'm very excited to have the journalists who are with us this evening share their thoughts about the important work that they do every day to bring us news here in Maine. I'd like to again thank them and thank you for joining us this evening. I'm sure that the program will be a great success. Thank you.
Great. Thanks again to Michael and to our sponsor. We very much appreciate the partnership. I don't want to delay any further, so let's get right to the topic and to the panel. I feel lucky every day to work with these two reporters, Rachel Ohm and Randy Billings. They will take it from here. Rachel, I think I'll hand off to you.
All right, thanks, John. And welcome everyone. We're going to get started on the first four referendum questions. So first off is question one, and I'm going to ask Randy a few questions about it, but I'll read question one first. It says, do you want to set a $5,000 limit for giving to political action committees that spend money independently to support or defeat candidates for office? So Randy, can you tell us a little bit about what that means and what does question one do and how did it get on the ballot?
Absolutely. Well, if a vote of yes on question one will set a new limit on the amount of money that people and businesses can contribute to a political action committee that is looking to influence the election of a candidate. That distinction is important because this limit would not apply to the committees controlled by the political parties or committees formed to advocate for the defeat or passage of a referendum question. So essentially what it would do is any political action committee that makes an independent expenditure advocating for the defeat or election of a candidate, an individual would be limited to a $5,000 donation to that committee. And people might be wondering what an independent expenditure might be. So these are groups that are not affiliated with any candidate or any campaign. Anyone can form a political action committee and try to influence an election. So these are ads that they're taking out and putting up solely by their own doing. It was placed on the ballot by a group of citizens. They went out and collected thousands of signatures to get this on the ballot. And it was motivated by just the massive amounts of money that are flooding our elections, especially since 2010 with the US Supreme Court ruling on Citizens United versus the FEC. That decision really just basically said, you can't put any limits on spending on campaigns because it's an infringement on free speech.
And then what are people saying about this question? Have you heard that there's any opposition to it?
Well, I think naturally there will be opposition to this, and it'll be the folks who have a lot of money and have a lot at stake with who gets put into office. Right now, there isn't any organized committee that's working against this. but there is a group of citizens called Citizens to End Super PACs, and they are the advocates for this question. That doesn't mean, a group won't pop up later and dump, millions of dollars into this, or, hundreds of thousands to try to defeat it. But as of now, nothing organized at this point.
And I always like to ask if there's a cost associated with referendums. Is there any cost with putting this in place?
Yeah, I think the major cost, if voters were to approve this, would come in the form of a legal challenge. The advocates fully expect that if this passes in Maine, that it will be taken to court. And that's actually the whole purpose of this. What they want to do is run this up through the courts and get it past federal appeals court, and hopefully get it before the U.S. Supreme Court. So what this decision will do is it won't necessarily overturn Citizens United, which dealt more with the amount of money a PAC can spend to influence an election. They're trying to get it on the other end, and they're trying to reduce the amount of money that an individual can contribute to these PACs. So what happened is, after the Citizens United decision, a lower appeals court ruled that the limitations for spending, getting rid of those should also apply to people who contribute money to those PACs. That circuit court ruling was never taken up by the Supreme Court, and that's what these advocates want to do in hopes of setting a new national precedent, because Maine would be the first state in the nation to adopt such limits since Citizens United. So they're hoping, as Maine goes, so goes the nation.
All right. Well, I think that's all I have for question one. I don't see any reader questions that have popped up yet, so I think we can move on to question two.
Absolutely. And Rachel's going to walk us through question two, which is the first of several bond issues. This may take a whole hour for me to read this, but indulge me here. Do you favor a bond issue of $25 million to provide funds to be awarded through a competitive process and to leverage matching private and federal funds on at least a one-to-one basis for research and development and commercialization for Maine-based public and private institutions in support of technological innovation in the targeted sectors of life sciences and biomedical technology, environmental and renewable energy technology, information technology, advanced technologies for forestry and agriculture, aquaculture and marine technology, composites and advanced materials, and precision manufacturing? Rachel, what is that all about?
Okay. Well, that was a mouthful. So this is the research and development bond. So the question would give us $25 million for the Maine Technology Institute, which is a nonprofit that was started and is funded by the state to distribute this money to public and private entities that are engaged in one of those 7 research sectors that you named in the question. So MTI would, they haven't finalized like the criteria for awarding the money yet, but they will do that if the bond passes. And then, I mean, they have like a basic outline of how the money would be spent. It's things like, what is your project plan? I mean, how many, like what would the impact be? What kind of investment do you have in it already? And they'll evaluate these proposals from these entities and would make awards for these projects. The companies or entities would also have to provide some matching funds. So that is one other piece of criteria. And Maine has done this before. We last did a research and development bond in 2017 that voters approved, and MTI awarded the money then on a similar process.
Were there any projects that were funded through the last round that folks might know about?
Yes, possibly. I do have some examples, so give me one second. I know there was like a mouse research mouse production facility at the Jackson Laboratory in Ellsworth. There was a grant for a company in Biddeford to produce outdoors gear. There was an expansion of an aerospace facility in Bangor. So that's kind of some examples of what this money might be used for.
And would the money go out all at once in like a year, or would this be like a multi-year thing?
I believe it is over a couple years. Yeah, sorry, I don't have that off the top of my head. It is, I believe it's multi-year, but I wouldn't want to say definitively without double checking that.
Yeah, that probably is going to be left to the final rulemaking and things like that, I would imagine. And final costs, I know when you borrow money, it costs money to borrow money. Do you know what the final price tag on this is after the interest?
Yep, so the bond is for 25 million. The final cost would be just under 32 million with the interest after a 10-year payback period.
All right. Anything else that we should know about this before we move on to question 3?
I mean, I would just say I haven't heard any opposition really to this question. There is a group that is raising money to support it. They've raised like $55,000 so far. And I haven't heard of any organized opposition.
All right. Well, I guess we can move on to question 3.
All right, question 3, back to you. Do you favor a $10 million bond issue to restore historic buildings owned by governmental and nonprofit organizations, with funds being issued contingent on a 25% local match requirement from either private or nonprofit sources? So start us off just telling us, what does this mean and how do they get on the ballot?
Yeah, so this, obviously, as the question says, $10 million to go towards the restoration of historic buildings that are owned by a governmental organization or a nonprofit organization. This is going before voters for 2 reasons. This is the result of a Republican-backed bill. So it was sponsored by, I believe it was Representative Solwyn Millet and possibly Rick Bennett. And the second reason that this is going before voters right now is because the state constitution requires voter approval to borrow any money on the state's behalf. So anytime you want to borrow money to do anything, we got to weigh in on it. So that's why you're seeing it on the ballot.
All right, and do you have some examples of like who might get the money or how it might be spent?
It's been a while from what I understand. I was talking to the Historic Preservation Commission, who will oversee this program, and they have overseen previous programs. Probably one that is closest to this one was back in the mid 80s. They borrowed, I think it was just a $2 million bond for a similar project. And when they did this back in the mid 80s, they distributed that money over a 4-year period. They had annual competitive grants that nonprofits and governmental agencies could apply and to try to get the funding. And sort of, there are, nonprofit groups and arts groups out there that are advocating for this bill because, a lot of these nonprofit groups, they operate on a shoestring budget, and they are often in, these really challenged community buildings that have a history in these communities, and finding the extra money to make sure that they don't fall down, and even getting a little extra money to make sure they shine a little brighter. It's harder for nonprofits to do that. So this would free up 10 million. And talking to the director of the commission, he expects it'll be a similar process for this 10 million going forward. It'd be a multi-year process through competitive grants.
Okay, so it sounds a little similar to the research and development bonds. And what about any opposition? Have you heard anyone that's opposed to this?
Haven't heard any opposition to it, not organized opposition to it. So I believe Maine has a pretty good track record when they put bond issues out. So I wouldn't expect to see too much in the way of opposition to this.
Okay, well, I think that should be good for question 3. Do you want to go to question 4?
Absolutely. All right, question 4, another bond issue. This one. Do you favor a $30 million bond issue to invest in the design, development, and maintenance for non-motorized, motorized, and multi-use trails statewide to be matched by at least $3 million in private in public contributions. Rachel, we're an outdoor state. People love their trails. They love their mountain. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this one?
Okay, yeah, I think that there is a lot of excitement around this question. It is historic for me. It's not something, a type of bond that we've done before. And it did come about through the legislative process. So it was brought up by lawmakers. I talked to the lawmaker who was the sponsor of the bill, Jessica Fay, and she said that, you know, people in the community and different organizations, including the Natural Resources Council of Maine, had brought up in conversation that this would be something that's really cool to have and important after, especially after the storms last winter that were so devastating for a lot of our trails and natural resources. So the money would be awarded again through a competitive grant process. And it would be, any organizations applying would have to, I think they have to be nonprofits or government entities. The trails would have to be posted for public use, and they also have to put up 10% matching funds. And then the money will be awarded over a 4-year period, although it can go a little longer if they don't have like enough grant applications to use it up in those 4 years. And then it will be awarded 25% for non-motorized trails, 25% for motorized, and then 50% for multi-use trails. Yeah.
Are there any, can you give our listeners, watchers, readers, any idea on maybe what types of projects or in what areas this funding might be able to go to improve some trails?
Yep, and I will also just take a minute. There's a question in the reader chat that says, who is the grantor for the funds? And that would be the Bureau of Parks and Lands, which is a state bureau of the Department of Agriculture. And so, yeah, the types of projects would be all over the state. I know there's an emphasis on accessibility and improving accessibility for people who are handicapped or maybe restricted in other ways from accessing trails currently. So accessibility will be a big part of it. And then I think also just, adding trails or expanding existing trail networks in different places all over the state.
And can you tell me a little bit about the group that's organized to advocate on behalf of this? Do you have that off the top of
Yes,
the head?
there is a group that's organized to advocate for the proposal. They're called Partnership for Maine Trails, and they're made up of 7 different organizations. I do not have the organizations off the top of my head. I know the Natural Resources Council of Maine is one of them. They do have a website, so people can go online and look it up. Partnership for Maine Trails, and they have raised about $60,000 so far. And I am not aware of any organized opposition.
All right. Anything else we need to know about this one, or should we get to the main event, the question that's on the top of everybody's mind right now about this new Maine flag?
I think we can get to the Maine flag.
All right. Well, Rachel, thanks for going back and forth with me about these referendum questions. I'm going to turn it back over to you for your conversation with David. I know I'm very much looking forward to hearing all of his knowledge about the flags. And would you like me to read the question, or would you like to take it from here?
I can take it from here, but thanks for explaining question 1 and question 3.
All right. Good luck. Have fun.
All right. All right. So we will get started on question 5. And before we do that, I want to introduce David Martucci, who is our expert who is joining us to answer questions about question 5. David is a vexillologist. I hope I'm not butchering that too badly. Someone who studies flags. He's lived in Maine since 1974 and currently lives in the town of Washington in Knox County. David has been a flag researcher since he was 14, when a teacher challenged him to write a paper to improve his grades, and he discovered the language and tradition of flags. For 6 years, he served as president of the North American Vexillological Association from 1998 to 2004. He has written and published numerous articles on flags in the U.S., has been featured talking about state flags on the History Channel, And I also like this little tidbit that you worked as a fact checker for the release of the state flag stamps by the U.S. Postal Service in 2000.
That's right.
So,
Thank you for having me.
okay, yeah, thank you for doing this. And I do want to read the question, if we can put that up one more time so people can hear the question. Question 5 is, do you favor making the former state flag replaced as the official flag of the state in 1909 and commonly known as the pine tree flag, the official flag of the state? So David, maybe you could start us off by just telling us a little bit about how we got here, how this referendum came up.
So there's been a number of attempts over the years to go back to our 1901 flag, which we sometimes call the good old pine and Polaris flag. And it started actually in 1991 when I worked with a state senator to have this question brought into the legislature. And we didn't get any support for it that year, nor in 1996 when I brought it back. And then I kind of laid it to rest at that point. And somewhere around 2016 or 2017, I met with an entrepreneur from Portland who started the Maine Flag Company, and he wanted to produce flags and other items with the pine tree and star motif. And he did, and it became kind of a popular item. You'll see the flag and flag-like items everywhere in this state. All the gift shops have pine and Polaris items in them, and then it went back into the legislature again in I think 2019 and 2021, and again in 2023. And the legislature voted to have the flag changed, but they subjected it to the referendum, which happens on November 5th.
Great. And can you tell me a little bit about the history of the flag? Like, tell me a little bit about the original 1901 flag, and then why did we stop using it? How did we end up with the flag that we have now, which features the state seal on the blue background?
Maine has an interesting and complicated flag history. To start with the 1901 flag is sort of starting in the middle, but I'll start there since that's the flag that we're considering.
Or start early. I mean, if you think there's something to be said about before that, you can start there also.
Well, I can go back pretty far. The pine tree as a symbol in New England originated with Native Americans. The Iroquois nation used the white pine tree as their symbol some 800 years ago. And when the first European colonists got here, they recognized the pine tree as a symbol of the natives of this country. And that was used in many different places on several different seals. And it's been recognized as the emblem of New England since shipbuilding was an important industry in the early days. And of course, the pine is a very important wood used in shipbuilding. And Massachusetts adopted a state seal that had two sides, which in those days was common. Today, we only have a single seal. But in the 18th century, seals had two sides because the actual physical seal applied to documents was like a locket thing, and it would have two sides, so you'd have a different design on each side. And the reverse side of the Massachusetts seal was a pine tree on a blue shield. And after the creation of the state of Maine in 1820, our state adopted a seal and a coat of arms that involved a pine tree and a moose on a shield, and the North Star and the motto Derigo. The picture you're seeing right now is the original design of the seal and what the coat of arms is supposed to look like. And so in 1822, the legislature ordered the military to return all the military flags that we had to Massachusetts and to have new ones made. And so new ones were made at that time that were white with a shield with a pine tree and a moose, and the state motto and name, and the name of the unit. And then that flag served for a militia flag until the Civil War. And during the Civil War, some of the early units actually carried these white flags, but the federal government wanted most units to carry blue flags, with the exception of Massachusetts troops. That's basically what they did, which is why so many states have blue flags with their state coat of arms on it today. And the first batch of Maine troops that went to the war carried blue flags with the state coat of arms on it on one side and the federal eagle on the other side. And then after 1863, they carried nothing but federal eagle flags. By 1901, the need for a state flag as opposed to a military flag was apparent. That was true in a lot of the states, and that was a period of time when a lot of states were adopting flags. And the initial bill that went into the legislature in 1901 called for a blue flag with the coat of arms on it. But the Adjutant General, John Richards, realized that that was really a military color, basically, and that a good flag would have a simpler design and would be directly used by the people and not necessarily only by the military. So he came up with the idea of the buff-colored flag with the pine tree and the star on it. And the symbolism was very significant, the buff color being a colonial color that represents tanned deer hide, which was a color used in the American Revolution by the Patriot Party, and it represents standing stiff for American independence. And then the pine tree had a series of 3 roots and 2 cut-off branches. The tree itself represented the people of the state. The 2 cut-off branches represented the 2 lost territories, New Hampshire in 1629 and northern Madawaska in 1843. And the 3 roots represented the divisions of government, the legislative, executive, and judicial that support the tree. And then the blue star, of course, represents our state motto, Derigo. So that was the design of the flag that the legislature adopted to great fanfare, actually. And that lasted until 1909, after Adjutant General Richards was no longer in office. There was a movement by people in the legislature to commemorate their people who were veterans of the Civil War, or mainly sons of the veterans of the Civil War, to remember that time in 1862 and 1863 when their forefathers carried blue flags with the Maine coat of arms on one side. And so that was passed. And if you read the law, which is still in effect, it's very complex, actually. It calls for a flag that's 4 feet 4 by 5 foot 6, made of silk, with the state coat of arms embroidered in silk, with a 2.5-inch gold silk fringe, mounted on a 9-foot pole, not counting the brass spearhead and ferrule, and mounted with a blue and white twisted silk cord and tassel set. And this is a description of a typical 19th century military flag. You'll notice the coat of arms on the original flag was different than the one we use today. This was the official design adopted in 1880 by the legislature after an event where the state seal was, shall we say, taken away from the state capitol and tossed into the Kennebec River and not being able to be recovered. So they had to have a new seal. And so this was the design of the original flag in 1909. There are no flags known to meet the requirements of the law in existence today. To have one made would be prohibitively expensive. And so the flags that we use have a more contemporary design on it, from a design made in 1919 by a book illustrator in Boston. And it's the design we're all familiar with, although there have been a lot of variations of that over the years as well. Maine is not known for its consistency in flag design. So that's where we are right now. And then in like I say, in 2023, the legislature decided to give the people, well, the original bill was just to change the flag, but by the time it got through the legislature in 2024, it became a referendum question for us to decide what flag we want to have.
So you mentioned at the beginning, like you were involved in advocating for the legislature to take this up. Why do you think that it would be important, or why do you think it would be good to go back to the 1901 flag?
Oh, there are a number of reasons. First of all, it is a very different flag than any other state flag. Right now, there are 22 state flags that are blue with a state emblem in the middle, usually the seal or coat of arms. And when there's a display of all 50 flags, nearly half of them are blue, and it's really hard to tell which are which. One always hopes that they're in alphabetical order, and you can sort of figure it out. But if they're not in alphabetical order, it's really difficult to do. And even if you get up close enough and you can see some of the designs, you may get a little confused. Our flag has a pine tree and a moose in the middle of it, and the Vermont flag has a pine tree and a cow. So it can be a little bit difficult to tell one from the other if you're not close enough to read the words. And of course, if you put words on a flag, unless you're going to pay double for a double-sided flag, they read the other way. So it's difficult to read what they say if they're flying, so that all you can see is the reverse side of the flag. So there's a number of reasons to do that, but the buff color flag with a green pine tree and a blue star is unlike any other state flag. And really everybody in this country, I believe, could figure out that Maine is the pine tree state. And so once you see that flag, I don't think you'll have any trouble identifying it. And I'll just say one more thing about that. One of the things about flags is that they are their own language, and words on flags are not necessary if the symbolism actually works. And I think the 1901 flag was a great flag design, and we're a great state, and I think we deserve a great flag.
So there's been, of course, a lot of debate over how exactly the pine tree and the star should look and what the 1901 version should look like. And for our viewers, in case they don't know, the design that the Secretary of State has settled on was picked through a design contest that was held over the summer. There was over 400 submissions that came in, and then the Secretary of State, Shanna Bellows, she had some advisors that she consulted with, and she ended up selecting the version that we have displayed right here as the version that would become the official flag if that's what voters choose. But David, can you tell us a little bit about like the different iterations and maybe like the ones that you have behind you on your screen, and kind of just what the debate has been over how the flag should look?
Well, there's a couple different ways to look at it. The language of the law doesn't actually specify a design. So any of the flags that are flying behind me right now would technically be correct flags. As long as you see a tree that you identify as a pine tree and a blue star on a buff background, that would count. The law, if passed, will give the Secretary of State the authority to prescribe a model design that's going to be on display in the Adjutant General's office. Now, the current flag is required to be on display in the Adjutant General's office. I will point out that the flag that's on display in that office right now does not meet the law requirements for what the flag is supposed to look like. And I would predict, I think, fairly easily that if this passes, that the same thing will happen, that people will fly the flag they want to fly, and I think it's perfectly legal to do so. The law only says it's a pine tree proper, meaning it's a proper style of pine tree. Generally, we interpret that as meaning a natural looking tree, but the pine tree flag that was adopted in 1939 as our separate marine flag, which is the model that the Maine Flag Company uses for their simplified design, that is also a pine tree according to the letter of the law. And so any design you want to use is actually just as legal as any other design. And the same goes for the color of buff. There is no real standardized color for buff. It can be anywhere from almost pure white to a very dark brown. And that's the same with deer hide. When you tan deer hide can come in many different shades of color. If you look around at deer hide products, you can see them in various shades from a creamy white almost to a dark brown, and it's the same thing. So, and that again, it's a perfectly legal thing. You can see the flags behind me have all different shades of buff in them, and they're all buff. There is no standardized color, even though I know the Secretary of State is going to standardize the colors supposed to be used and the tree that's supposed to be used. But again, that's only for the model flag, and if you want to model your flag after it, you're more than welcome to. If you want to make a flag in your own manner, that's fine too.
So do you think that like more abstract version, the one that was popularized by the Maine Flag Company, that will continue to see that like a lot of merchandise and like in popular culture, even if this more like naturalistic one is chosen by voters?
I have no doubt that we will continue to see that and all of the others. There are at least a dozen, I think almost 24 different patterns on flags and other items that you can find today. And I think that situation will continue. I don't really think that's going to change any. I could possibly be wrong, but I really don't think so. I think those companies are going to continue to market their own versions, and I think that's perfectly acceptable.
Okay. And then, I mean, so what is the real impact if this change is made? My understanding is, like you mentioned, like really the only thing the official flag is used for is like to have a copy on hand and to have it in the adjutant general's office. And that like any flags that are flown outside of state offices or anything like that, it's kind of up to that department if they want to switch it out. Is that your understanding as well?
I would guess they were all probably find a vendor that will sell them the model pattern. I would guess that's true.
But there's not like a requirement that they're gonna have
There's
to.
nothing in the law requiring anybody to fly any particular flag, even state offices. There's nothing in the law requiring them to throw out all their existing blue flags and go buy new flags right away. So there's no real fiscal impact on that. The regular budgets that they use for flags will actually go a little further because the buff flag with the pine tree is a little less expensive to make. And I think that what that will result in is either departments will have a little bit of a budget surplus or they'll buy more flags. I kind of think they'll buy more flags. But anyway, only time will tell what really happens in those events.
Okay. Why is it less expensive to make?
Oh, it's fewer colors, a simpler design. It depends on the manufacturing process, but many processes will probably be able to save a little bit of money. I would guess that the retail cost of this flag, even the one that the Secretary of State is going to use as a model, as compared to the blue flag has about, I think, 22 colors in it, 23 colors in it, if you really stop and figure it out. Although there are no official colors, you can find different colors on different flags. So there are no official colors to the current flag. So that could be simplified, perhaps. Some flags made in the Far East are much simpler in design and with fewer colors in them, and they generally are cheaper flags.
Okay. And I do just want to let people know that I do see that there are reader questions that are popping up, and we are going to save those for the end. I just have a few more things to ask you, David. And then we also do have some reader questions that came in advance as well. So we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. What are you hearing from the public?
Your voice is bouncing on me there.
What's that? Can you still hear me okay?
My technological breakdown here for a second. Your voice faded in and out for a second. Go ahead, ask me the question.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question. So what are you hearing from the public? Like, what do you think is the public sentiment about making this change?
Well, the people that I know around here are all in favor of the change. I don't know anybody actually who wants to retain the blue flag. There are people in the state who do for their own various reasons. Um, uh, there's been some undeserved criticism of what the reasoning behind changing the flag is. And I think that that's too bad that some people believe certain things that aren't true. But I would say that the real telling factor is that if you go to any corner of this state and drive around, you're going to see the buff flag with the good old pine and Polaris on it much more often than you're going to see the blue flag with the state seal on it.
So I do want to ask about some of the opposition. I know there are some people that are opposed to the change, including some lawmakers, and some of the reasons that I've heard for the opposition are, people like the historical nature of the blue flag and that we've had it for so many years and that it's tied to the Civil War. And then I think people also don't see a need for a change. They think it's like a waste of time and resources to like debate this and change it. And so I'm wondering if you can respond to those two pieces of criticism and what you would say to that.
First of all, humans have been flying flags and flag-like objects for at least 7,500 years, and probably way more than that. So flags are an important thing to us, to our consciousness, to our society. One of the reasons I became interested in the subject was to try to answer that question. Why are flags? Why do they mean so much to so many people? Why would a group of a several thousand men be willing to join an army and go fight to the death over a flag? It's a really interesting question. I don't know that we really have an answer to it, but there are plenty of people who are studying that very question. To get beyond that part of the question that you asked me, a lot of people think that there's going to be some kind of cost to this. And I think I already addressed that there's no real cost to any of this unless you want to go out and buy a new flag right now. And the other part of that is there's a political belief that this is some kind of a liberal woke trick on people, and it's really not. I mean, this is something that is an important part of our history. I know the blue flag has some associations with the Civil War, but that was a federal government mandate in order to contrast the flags that the armies that they were putting into the field to contrast their flags with the predominantly red flags of the Confederates. So you see an army with what looks like a red flag, an army what looks like a blue flag, and you can tell them apart. That's really the reason why the blue flag was put into existence. Before that, our flags were always white. We are a daughter of Massachusetts. The Massachusetts flags were always white, and there's a reason for that. That has a long historical tradition. Buff became the color of a lot of the flags during the American Revolution. And a lot of our earliest flags were buff colored because that was an important symbol of independence in those days. So really the color of the flag was something that really wasn't native to Maine. The blue color was not native to Maine. It was a federal color that we were asked to use and that we willingly wanted to use in order to make sure our troops would not be confused for Confederates. But the earliest regiments that we fielded in 1861 went into the field bearing the white flags of Maine, which were our traditional militia colors. And one of them was captured by Confederate forces, and there's a great deal of record keeping about that flag, which was returned to this state in 1905, but then lost. Nobody knows what happened to it after it came back. So, you know, I've also heard some things that this flag is similar to the Appeal to Heaven flag that certain Christian nationalists are using. Well, that original flag was the Massachusetts Navy flag, and was used in 1775, and you know. Other groups have used it over the years, left-wing groups, right-wing groups. Those kinds of flags, those historical flags, when people aren't creative enough to create their own designs, they will often look for a historical flag that they think represents what they're doing today. And I don't see the similarity. I think this flag with the star on it is different enough so that there's nothing, there's no words on it. I don't think it's a similar flag, and I don't think that's a concern. The voters may disagree with me, but that's how I see it.
Right. We did get a few reader questions about that. I don't think we have the appeal to heaven flag on hand to show people, but basically, could you just describe it a little bit so people know what we're talking about? It says appeal to heaven, right? Like over
It's a white flag with a pine tree in the center and the motto appeal to heaven. Now, we don't have any original copies of that flag. Whether the motto was below the tree or above the tree, we don't know. There are drawings of it both ways from the Revolutionary War. In 1775, it was adopted as the official flag of the Massachusetts Navy. And then in 1971, they modified the flag by removing the motto. So the Massachusetts Navy flag is a white flag with a pine tree in the center. So take that for what it's worth.
Okay. So I just have one more question, and then I want to get to some reader questions. We talked, like you touched a little bit before on other states that have changed their flags and the fact that so many states have, oh, my lights just went out. That so many states have that blue background with a seal. When you and I talked before today, you mentioned like Minnesota and Utah have recently changed their flags. Can you just mention like or explain why some states, other states have recently moved to change their flags and yeah, why they've done that?
Well, the reasoning behind it. Now, this is the former Minnesota flag, also a blue flag with the state seal on the middle, and this is the new Minnesota flag, which is a simplified design representing the waters of the state and the fact that it's one of the northern states. And Utah, for example, they had a blue flag with the state coat of arms on it, and they've come up with a flag with their beehive emblem and a stripe that represents the mountains. There you go. Both of them there on the same pole. That's interesting. I just make a little aside here that in international vexillological terms, that means Utah has defeated Utah in battle. But anyway, the factor is basically the same. Blue flags with coats of arms. They're hard to distinguish. In Minnesota's case, there was an added feature in that the old Minnesota flag featured a white settler chasing away an Indian. Well, there's different interpretations of that, but that's what it looks like. And so that was another factor in that particular case. You can see the farmer with his gun there. He's plowing the field, and the Indian's running away because he's afraid of the farmer and his gun. And so that's 18th and 19th century symbolism, actually 19th century in this case, symbolism that no longer applies today. And I would say there's also a factor involved in that. In the Maine flag, the current Maine flag shows two white men, a farmer and a sailor. And there's a lot of criticism from some people that's not the symbolism we necessarily want to be putting forth. And the solution to that, of course, is remove the men from the flag. And hey, if you're going to do that, change the blue to a tan flag. And anyway, it's not just those states. I mean, other states have had reasons to change their flags. For example, in the South, Mississippi changed from a flag that was predominantly Confederate to a more neutral flag, and Georgia went from one Confederate-inspired flag to a different one that was less offensive. And there are other states that are in the process of considering what to do about their flag. Some flags, for example, Oregon, They have a blue flag with the state coat of arms on one side, but on the other side is just a beaver. And there's some discussion there as to just make the whole flag with just the beaver on it. So that would be, significantly different for them. But it's not, state flags are not sacred. Some people treat these kinds of flags as some kind of sacred item, but they're not sacred. They've been modified over the years. They get changed from time to time. There was a period when there were really no state flags, and this was something that evolved at the end of the 19th century into what we see today. And so I think that this is not going to be the end of the movement. There are other states. Massachusetts, for example, has a whole discussion going on whether the Indian on their coat of arms that has the white arm above it with the sword is an appropriate symbol. So we have that discussion going on in many of the states. And there was a time when there were more states with blue flags with their coat of arms on it. And that has been changing slowly over the years. And I think that will continue long after this debate is over.
So Maine won't be the first or the last probably to have this debate.
No, and I think if this referendum fails, I don't think you're going to be surprised if this comes back again at some future date.
Okay. Well, great. That wraps up my questions. We do have like 10 or 15 minutes left, so I will ask some of the submitted questions that we got. There's one I think I can just answer off the bat. Will the ballot question have a photo of the choices so it will be clear which flag we're voting for? The ballot does not have the picture on it.
No.
So the flag that people will be voting for is the winning submission from Adam Lanier of Gardner that the Secretary of State selected, and it's printed in there.
Not exactly. Not exactly. You're going to be voting on the language that says it's going to be a buff flag with a pine tree proper in the center and a blue North Star on it. And that's the language we're going to be voting on. And if that passes, then the Secretary of State is supposed to recommend a design to be used for the model flag. And I guess she's already made that decision, even though the bill hasn't passed yet.
Right. She's identified which one will be that like official design.
And my understanding is she's going to be putting out some election materials that will include that design, in the printed material, but it won't be on the actual ballot itself.
Right. It is in the Secretary of State printed a voter guide, and it is in the voter guide. And then they did tell me that they're hoping it will also be like on display at polling places, but I don't know if that will happen everywhere.
Yeah.
All right, let's see what else we have. The appeal to heaven flag, how controversial has that been? Will that have an impact? You've already addressed that. What is your favorite out-of-state flag design, and how does that compare to the new state of Maine flag? Well, the one that's proposed.
You mean other state flags? Is that the question?
Yeah, which one is your favorite?
Well, there's no question that the best designed state flag in the entire United States, in many people's opinions, not just mine, is the flag of New Mexico, which is a bright golden yellow with a red Zia Indian sun in the center. That speaks to the state in so many different ways. You could write thousands of pages on that symbol and why it's important and why it means what it means and how it defines the state of New Mexico.
And people just like it like for the simplicity, or what is the?
It's simple, it's beautiful, it's significant, it's historically important. It includes the Native American symbolism, so it includes segments of the population that are typically not included in state flags. And I think that it's just so you see it the first time you ever see it, you'll say, what a beautiful flag. And it really does look like New Mexico. I mean, you really can't mistake what flag it is once you know about it at all. There are other state flags that are quite nicely done. The let's see, Alaska is blue with the Big Dipper and the North Star on it. The state flag of South Carolina has the palmetto tree on a blue field with a crescent moon in the corner. There's some very simple, beautiful flags. But I think New Mexico is the most beautiful one, in my opinion.
Okay.
But the new, or hopefully new, Maine state flag will be right up there.
Yeah. So someone else submitted this question. They're confused as to what we're voting on. Are we voting to keep the old 1901 design or a new updated design? The wording is not clear to me. So we just need to explain that a yes vote changes the flag to the pine tree flag. A no vote keeps the current flag.
Right. A yes vote will reinstall the pine tree and Polaris flag, and a no vote will keep the blue flag with the state coat of arms.
Yeah. See what else. Are panelists aware of why or how the original simpler flag depicted the white pine, a tree with fewer lower limbs, making it the mainstay of our early wood industry, especially ships' masts in Maine history? Is that something that you're familiar with?
So yeah, I mean, there's an element of truth to that, but the design goes way back. The native peoples of this territory often and still to this day used a pine tree as a symbol for the people. The forests of this state kind of provided a lot of things for the people that lived here before Europeans settled here, and so it goes way back. Shipbuilding and that kind of thing were an important early industry, and certainly European settlers were more than happy to adopt that as a symbol of this region. All of New England actually, at one time or another, had pine tree flags. And so, yes, it was important for those early industries, but it goes way back beyond that.
I want to get to some of there's just a few questions that came in live. One of them is, why is Maine rolling back to a previous design rather than making a whole new flag? Do you have any insight into that? Do you know if that was something that was considered, is like just designing a whole new flag?
Well, I guess I'm the culprit. In 1991, after studying Maine's flag history, and Maine's flag history is fascinating. It's probably more complex than anybody realizes, and it's certainly more complex than any other state, I think. I realized in 1901 we adopted a beautiful and simple flag, and I thought very personally that it was a beautiful design and that it would deserve to be considered again as our state emblem. And so I worked with a state senator to bring that to the legislature to see if there was interest in readopting that flag. I'm sorry to say I got 0 votes in the committee in 91. I came back in 1996 with the same proposal. It was a little different, but basically the same. And we did a whole lot better. We got 1 vote in committee. And so when the design began to be used by people on flags and T-shirts and mugs and buttons and jewelry and signs in the later part of the 2000s, 2017, 2018. Then I realized that the time was probably coming back, but other people took up the mantle. I wasn't as involved then as I was earlier. I certainly testified in those committee meetings, but I think that it's a flag that has important historical significance. I think it's a different approach than a lot of other states go. We could have opened it up and tried to come up Well, I mean, the contest that the Secretary of State had drew over 400 results, some of which were completely different, had nothing to do with the pine tree and the star. One of them even had Chuck Norris on it with his guns blazing. I mean, people got a little bit crazy with that. So, we could have gone that way. I don't know that that would have been a good way to go personally. But, I'm only one guy, and I happen to think the historical flag is the best of the possible design choices we could make.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine how many submissions there would be if it was just open to anything, right? I mean, if we had over 400 and the parameters where there needs to be a pine tree and a star on a white background, it would be
On a buff background.
buff background, it would be a lot.
Yeah.
There was one question that came up about the bonds and whether there's any downside to funding major initiatives like this through a bond. And I think to that, I would just say, like there is some interest on the bonds, right? We talked about question 2, for example, being $25 million, but actually costing like 32 million. So there is like that little bit of extra money that is spent, but I can't really speak to any other downsides generally about bonding. So just wanted to get that out of the way. I know we're running out of time. So just maybe one more question, if that's okay with you, David. So someone wrote in saying that they're concerned that there is no mention of Maine anywhere on the proposed flag design. Do you think that other states and people elsewhere will realize that this is the Maine flag?
Oh, yeah, I don't think there'd be any question about it. We're known across the country as the Pine Tree State. And I think if you see a flag with a pine tree on it, most people are going to make that association. I think it would be a logical thing in almost any case. I mean, your best flags have simple designs on them, and I think this one won't be any different than that. And it doesn't take too much to figure out what it is you're looking at. I really believe that wherever this flag is displayed, people will say, "There's the Pine Tree State."
Okay, well, I know it's 8 o'clock and I think we've answered most of the questions that have come in. Is there anything else that you think people should know about this referendum, or anything else that you would want to mention before we go?
I'm gonna certainly advocate that people vote yes on question 5. I think it's a good move. It's a historical flag. It's an important flag, and I think that it's much more representative of this state than one of the similar 22 other flags that are blue with the state coat of arms or other symbol on them. And I think that it's going to be a good move all the way around. So, and I thank you for having me. I think this has been a great discussion.
Yeah, well, thank you for participating. It's been really nice to have your insight into the process and the history of the flags. So thank you for doing it, and thanks everyone for listening in.